In this video, I'm going to look at how to create more depth and dimension in my landscape painting. If you're struggling to get that sense of foreground, middle ground and distance and make it look convincing, then these 5 tips are going to be really helpful for you. I like to use this approach in every landscape I'm doing, and I guess over time some of it becomes automatic, and with practice that's going to happen to you as well. But I find these 5 essentials have to be included in any landscape where you want any sense of dimension. So let's have a quick look, and I'll run it through a painting demonstration I did so you get to see it in action. This is the reference I'm using, and we're going to try to get some of that depth and dimension in the painting. My palette, pretty much standard except for orange, which I've just added for convenience here. And I'm working on a gessoed panel 10 by 12. Now item 1 is overlapping elements. As I draw this out and get a basic composition, I'm thinking about elements that I can overlap. This tree, for instance, that's going to go there is overlapping some of the background landscape, and then of course that's going to be overlap part of the hillside at the back there, and then in the foreground we've got this beautiful building that's going to be a big feature or element in the foreground that's going to help create more depth and dimension by overlapping those landscape elements behind it. I'm even going to use the fence poles right from the foreground as well to also overlap and connect foreground elements to the building, and even overlap into part of the landscape behind. Overlapping elements are very important in any landscape to create depth, and you must use whatever you can and overlap it so that it doesn't look like it's all been stuck on in a succession, but you want it to look like a natural evolving landscape going into the distance. Right, the next important element is atmospheric perspective, and this is where objects lose contrast and color intensity and sharpness as they recede into the distance. So here I'm painting the mountain sort of a cool grayish violet, a blue violet basically, which pushes it back because cool blue recedes, and it's also a fairly soft light value, so it's not coming forward like a dark shape would. I'll also soften those edges of the mountain against the sky just a little bit as well. That also helps to create that more atmospheric element. And the sky is the lightest light. I've added a touch of lemon yellow to the blue, cerulean blue and white to give that sky a little bit of the harmony of colors with the landscape as well. Some of the landscape tends to reflect up into the sky as well, so that adds to that idea of the sky color. As we come forward, the landscape is getting a bit darker, and of course that creates a sensation, I guess, where the darker shapes tend to come forward. And all of these horizontal elements get broken up by the verticals of the trees, and that overlapping relationship of shapes I spoke about earlier will apply here. But you can see how the soft sort of grey down or desaturated colors in the background recede, and as I warm the colors up coming forward and make them a little darker in value, they will naturally get more visible to our eye. We react to contrast more, and this dark line I'm putting in here is going to come forward, and so on. The principle applies as I come forward. I start adding more saturated color, that is color with more pigment, and less desaturating colors mixed in. Okay, leading lines is another important element. Now when you look at the landscape there behind the building, you can see there's a line cutting across the field, a little road or path, and I've got to make sure I put that in, because that's a very important line that's helping to lead the eye across that section to the distant trees. And I'll carry on with that idea as I add the fence posts in the foreground, and they will link up one line after another, and your eye will tend to follow those lines. You can use things like utility poles as well in the foreground, getting smaller into the distance. You can see that line there. Takes the eye right across that field very quickly. So scale and proportion is another important element. The big building is obviously big compared to the objects behind it. The trees, the field, etc. We got this huge building basically, and its size brings it forward, but also helps to create a contrast with the smaller shapes behind it. And because the tree back there looks small, and even the mountains relatively look small compared to the building, we get an impression of distance. And we know that those trees and mountains must be quite far away. Now I've left a space there where I'm going to add a figure. That figure as well is going to help to create an element of a proportion and emphasize the distance. So scale and proportion, use that carefully. You don't want to make shapes that are way out and look unrealistic. You know, if I created a giant figure, for instance, and it looks out of proportion to the building, then it's not going to be particularly convincing. Trees are a favorite element, of course, in a landscape. But also, as you can see here, I'm using bigger brush strokes and thicker paint in the foreground. That also creates an element of space. We sort of naturally feel that colors that are stronger, brush strokes that are bigger, and bigger shapes will be in the foreground. So then we have edges, a very important aspect to create a sense of believability, perhaps a little more realism. So edges in the foreground will be harder or sharper, particularly a building like this, for instance, and the roof line. There will be stronger, harder edges. We'll also use edges with the figure and contrast between the dark figure and relatively strong edges with the building behind it. Those will bring the shapes forward, and everything behind it will get slightly softer edges until we get into shapes way into the distance that should have soft edges, almost perhaps receding into some misty distance and have very soft edges. And all of that makes us perceive them as shapes far away, and the hard edges as shapes that are close up. And it gives that believability to the scene. You certainly will register it, but you may not even notice why you consider them to be closer. Now these poles I'm putting in are quite strong contrasts, value contrasts. I will soften the top of the poles a little as well, just to make them slightly more atmospheric as you can see here in the concluding parts of the painting. But all in all, now you have a distinct sense of the foreground, the middle ground, and the distance, all creating more depth and dimension. Well, I hope that was useful to you, and you can try these tips out in your next landscape painting. I'm pretty sure it's going to give you an added sense of depth and dimension to your painting as well. Now, if you want to find out more about oil painting, acrylics or gouache, all of these techniques apply to any opaque medium. You can find these on my painting school. There's a free course for you up here or in the description, and you can check out what's there and see what's suitable for you. And of course, subscribe to this channel. There are plenty more videos coming your way, and you don't want to miss those. So hit the subscription and notification bell and you won't miss a video. All right, sounds good. Well, until next time, happy painting and cheers for now.